Okay, I'm going to record a video here going over the raid boss Shyvana compositions in Teamfight Tactics. Basically, this is the comp that I've been forcing pretty much every game that I can since I kind of theory crafted most of it, and then I've slowly been adding and changing my theory crafting based on playtesting it, and I've been climbing pretty much ever since. I've sitting around a 20% win rate right now. I've only played around 50 or 60 games or so. I'm currently gold 2 on NA. So, why Shyvana as the raid boss? That's probably the first and most important question. So, basically, the two most important factors to having a successful composition are that you have a carry, and that the carry will A, output enough damage, but B, live long enough to output enough damage. So survivability equals damage, basically. And so, for example, if we had Draven or something, the two pretty much required items on every carry are Dragon's Claw and Phantom Dancer. This is to deal with assassins mainly. It does get countered by Rapid Fire Cannon, but it's worth it against assassins that you just need this so that your carry doesn't get one shot and immediately die. And then Dragon's Claw, pretty much mandatory. There's a lot of elementalists running around. Sorks is coming back and becoming more popular now. Of course, demons, you have Aatrox and Varus that do a lot of big spell damage and things like that. Vigars, things like that. So there's lots of spell damage, so you need to be able to live through that. And then pretty much you have a third damage item. So at this point, you could put on Rageblade. Generally, Rapid Fire Cannon's probably the best and most versatile, things like that. So pretty much every carry is going to look in some variation of this. If I had Aurelion Sol, he would basically, instead of having Dragon's Claw, he's going to have the Dragon tag, which is actually better than the item. So that's basically now the reason why we're going on Shyvana. I'll get to that in a minute. So him, you would definitely put on Rapid Fire Cannon. He doesn't really need, or Phantom Dancer, you don't really need a Rapid Fire Cannon as much on him, so instead you could put on Spear of Sojin, for example, and then some other item, whatever you wanted, Deathcap maybe, who knows. And so that's basically the benefit of having the Dragon Tag, is that you get a free item slot. So, that is basically why we have Shyvana here, is that in pairing with the Dragon Tag, she is probably the best physical damage carry in the game. I would say Draven does more damage, but she is going to be better because she gets an extra damage item, and her synergy is even better than having Dragon Claw and a couple of other things that I'll get to in a minute. So she's also going to have a gigantic health pool because she has the Shapeshifter bonus, so she's going to be much tankier than Draven, in addition to taking 0 damage from magic. So why are we going for a physical damage based carry rather than a spell damage based carry? And that's pretty much the reason, is sometimes you're going to be playing against someone who's playing dragons, and in that case, you're going to need physical damage. You can always deal physical damage, you cannot always deal spell damage. So I think putting your items and basing them around a physical damage carry will generally work out to be more versatile. And then, so the number one most important item when making a raid boss Shyvana comp is you're going to want Aurelion Sol, and you're going to want Phantom Dancer on Shyvana. That is the number one most important thing. And from there, we go into a couple of other options. So, first of all, you're going to want the other Shapeshifter bonus. So let's get Nidalee here. I don't really like how they organized this. So you have Nidalee, Gnar, Elise, and Swain. Those are the other Shapeshifters that you pretty much have access to. And they are pretty much in this exact order, as Swain is better than Gnar, which is better than Elise, which is better than Nidalee. So, in the generalist, like idealist comp, you would actually drop out Nidalee and you would put in Swain and you would put in Gnar. The reason Gnar is better than either Elise or Nidalee is that he gives you CC, and he's also much tankier. He's going to have a much bigger health pool. And then Swain is pretty much the same exact tags as Elise, in addition to having Imperial. So, and he's also just obviously like a way better unit. Like having a level 2 Swain or something can just like 1v5. He is a god. So you're going to have Swain, you're probably going to have Gnar. Then, you see you have Imperial bonus here, so I normally try and go with Draven. And in addition, he's a demon, so we'll also try and grab Aatrox here. I'm trying to kind of construct this backwards from how I initially constructed this team comp. So then we have Aatrox here. And then we need one other Blade Master. And so we'll put in Yasuo most likely, because he is just probably the strongest single Blade Master that you can get. and you'll see now we have 2 demons. So what is a benefit of tier items? If we think about tier items conceptually, they give you starting mana. They don't give you any mana after you've cast the spell the first time, only your first spell cast. So in terms of the first spell cast being very important, for example, shapeshifters, pretty important. Aurelion Soul is good and Aatrox are good, but you don't really want like tier items, for example, on Yasuo. If you give him Seraphs, then he only needs like 1 auto attack, and then he can immediately do his spell again and things like that. That's very common on Akali. But basically, you can think of the tier items as being exceptionally good on shapeshifters because they're going to get their shapeshift off A, more reliably, and B, more quickly, and they basically are getting full value of that starting mana. And it's probably the most important starting mana. And so then let's add in Morgana here, because we also have a sorcerer in form of Aurelion Soul. So let me try and find Morgana here. Here she is. And so this is basically your standard endgame team comp here. And then what we'll do is we'll want the demon item on Shyvana. That is the second most important item in my opinion. This is like what I consider to be the best version of this comp. I'm going to go over a lot of other comp variations here in a minute. I'm just starting with this because this is the one that, if you can force it, I think this is the best comp to force. And then the third item, I think Rapid Fire Cannon is the best third item on Shyvana. That basically increases her damage output by more than 25% against any of the enemy carry that is going to have Phantom Dancer. You're going to get the 4 demon bonus. So now you have 4 demons that are transforming and things like that. And so basically, I would say pretty much just Phantom Dancer on Shyvana is the only required item. And then Darken is about equal with having either Morello's or Red Buff on someone else. So there's Red Buff. I'm trying to find Morello's. Here's Morello's. So you would put Morello's on Morgana, and you would put Red Buff on your third Blade Master that is not Draven and is not Aatrox. In this case, it would be Yasuo ideally, but before you get to late game, the second best option for that is Gangplank. The reason for Gangplank is he can also take the Red Buff item, and his barrels will apply the physical on hit, but also the barrels will apply Morello's and apply the spell on hit burn. The reason why having a burn is the second most important thing is you will see a lot of other comps are running Gunblade, they're running Bloodthirster on Draven, they're running Warmogs, they're running, all these healing items that are completely hard countered pretty much. Nobles, it's also good to have a healing item for. It's good against enemy Swains, it's good against like so many things. Having a burn item is pretty much required in this meta. I would pretty much consider it required. So number 1 most important item is Phantom Dancer. Second most important item is a burn item. Both burn items share a Giant's Belt, so after you have... Bow is your number 1 priority on like carousel rounds and things like that. Second highest priority is going to be spatulas, because we're going to have multiple good uses for other spatulas that I'll get to in a minute, but primarily you're going to use the first one to get demon buff on Shyvana. That way you can get 4 demons. And then third most important is going to be Giant's Belts, which are pretty much kind of tied with a Chain Vest, a Giant's Belt and a Chain Vest, because you're going to need the first Chain Vest to go on Shyvana, and then if you get a second Chain Vest, then you can put that on a Red Buff. Ideally, you would get both Red Buff and Morello's, and in this case, obviously, you just wouldn't have Gangplank, but I'm saying before you get to late game and have Yasuo, you would have Gangplank here. So, obviously, before you get Swain, you can have Elise. And then you basically get the same thing, you just don't have Imperial buff on your Draven, and then before your higher level here, you can pretty much have this comp, and this gives you 4 Demon, 3 Shapeshifter, and 2 Dragon. 2 Dragon is the number 1 most important synergy, 3 Shapeshifters is the next most important, and then 4 Demons is probably the third most important in terms of your synergies. Blade Master is kind of like an extra synergy, that's basically what you would splash into the comp, and then obviously Sorcerer's kind of the same thing. If you have the option of, for example, you don't get the Darken item that early enough in the game, and you still need the demon bonus, is that you can keep Elise here, and then when you find Swain, or until you find Swain, you just put in like Varus, for example, and this way you can have the 4 demons and the 3 shapeshifters. And then obviously before you find Gnar, you can always have Nidalee. Where is Nidalee? Here. And so you can have a very early game like viable composition here that functions without having any item beyond a single Phantom Dancer. And the only 4-cost unit you need is one single Aurelion Soul. Aurelion Soul is not our carry, so we don't need to find multiples of him. And so now let's talk about positioning. So if I go back to our fully endgame comp here, and I need Draven, and I need Yasuo. And let's put these items back where they belong. Get a red buff back on him. Okay, so obviously Yasuo has to be by himself. We generally want him in the front because he's going to be important as getting red buff on hitting their front line. We could put him over here, but then if somebody has their front line over here, maybe he gets sniped by some long-range thing or a blitz hook potentially, and then he's not burning their front line. The burn is better on front line because they're going to have the highest health pools. Generally, you just want it on as many targets as possible. Yasuo is pretty good at that. His tornado can hit pretty much everybody. But having him very centralized means he'll have quick access to the front line, and then hopefully he's basically just a meat shield for your shapeshifters. You don't want them in the front because they need to transform. So you want Shyvana in the middle because she's going to be your main carry. She's going to be the most protected. You'll want Aurelion Soul in the corner. He is basically Blitz Hook and Assassin bait. So for example, before you have Draven and whatnot and Yasuo, I'll just move them over here, is that Assassins are going to jump to the furthest away unit, which is going to be him, and then he can just tank their spell damage of like a Kali or whatever, because he's going to have the dragon buff, or get pulled by Blitz, and it's no big deal for your comp to still function. Draven is in this corner. If you have, for example, a Draven in this far corner, and you put Rapid Fire Cannon on him, is that you will have the other enemy board up here, and if an enemy is in their opposite corner, like pretty much mirroring the Draven's position, and he has a Rapid Fire Cannon, he cannot hit that unit from this hex. He has to move forward, and he'll move forward to where the Shyvana is, or I think he might actually have to move forward up to where Swain is, and then maybe even over here if Shyvana is still standing here or something, because these units all three of these are ranged, so they will kind of stay where they are, basically. So if you have Draven over here and then give him a Rapid Fire Cannon, this works also for like Vayne, for Ashe, for pretty much any like ranged unit that you will give a Rapid Fire Cannon that has the normal base like standard 3 range or whatever plus, is that from this hex they are able to hit the entirety of the opponent's board. So they will not have to move if they are in this hex. So that's why we're putting Draven here. And also Draven is going to be our second damage he's like tied for our second damage carry. It's basically between Draven and Swain as your second carry. And so you also don't want him in the corner in the first place because, again, you don't want him to get blitz hooked. So if they have a blitzcrank somewhere over here, it's going to pull Aurelion Soul before pulling Draven. And so that way your Draven is still positioned safely behind your front line and things like that. You obviously want Morgana as a front line and Aatrox. Both of these are to get off the Morello's debuff and also just to chunk their whole front line and hit as many targets as possible. You generally want Morgana away from the wall simply because more targets are going to be closer to the like midpoint of the field or whatever, so generally Morgana is going to be able to hit more targets with her ult if she's closer to the middle, but you could pretty much swap these based on which one you had as a 2 or a 3 star if you wanted and was tankier, because generally even targets that are in this shared corner here is that they will generally still focus the target to the hex 1 away from the wall first and then target the one closest to the wall second. That's generally just because this target against this wall can pretty much only be hit by 2 melee units, whereas this one can be hit by 3, or even more if they get a good surround on it, and ranged targets, I think, just acquire them as a target easier for whatever reason. So that's pretty much, and then obviously your shapeshifters here, you want them in the back line sort of to get their transformations off and things like that. Again, you want Gnar a bit more unprotected compared to Swain, because Swain getting his ult off is actually more important than Gnar in this case, because he has 2 of the important synergies being Imperial and Demon, and obviously Shapeshifter, but Gnar just has Shapeshifter. Gnar is pretty much just to be a health bar. If he gets his CC off, thumbs up. If not, he was an HP bar that wasn't Swain or Shyvana, and you're happy that they hit Gnar instead. So that is pretty much the positioning for this comp. So again, before you get all these fancy items and things like that, if you can't get a Rapid Fire Cannon, because bows are going to be very contested, and you get an extra spatula, the best use for another spatula, is going to be a Yuumi. It can either go on Swain, it can also go on Aatrox. That is also a good use for it, but Swain is going to be the best because he'll then get double mana generation, and he can go into his ult more frequently. If you get extra tears after using them on the first Darken item, you can put a Seraphs on him, and that is good. You can also put, for example, a Frozen Heart on Swain, and that's pretty good. Negatrons, your first priority on Negatrons is put them on a unit that you're going to get rid of later, and then put the Dragon's Claw onto Swain. If you get, for example, another bow and a Chain Vest for whatever reason, you'll want both a Dragon's Claw and a Phantom Dancer on Swain, and those would be the 3 ideal items on Swain, I would say. Secondary best use for another spatula is going to be the Blade of the Ruined King, and you're going to this makes a Blade Master, and you're going to put this on Shyvana. If, for example, you have the Phantom Dancer, the Darkened item, and then a bow, and then you find another spatula, and you're not expecting, like, the game is going to be over pretty soon, you're at 20 HP or whatever, and you're not expecting to find a Rapid Fire Cannon, you can put Blade Master on Shyvana. That way you'll have 3 Blade Masters before having level 8. Generally, you do want to push to level 8 almost every game. I generally level up before the very first PvP round. I try and level up either at 2 of 10, 4 of 10, or 6 of 10 XP before Krugs in order to hit level 5. And then I generally level up at 14 of 16, or 14 of 30, sorry. And then you spend 16 gold in order to level up to level 6. And then I level up again, generally with excess gold and whatnot, to hit level 7. I reroll at level 7, mostly trying to find at least a single Gnar. Ideally, you would find Gnar level 2. A single Aurelian Soul is probably number 1 priority, and then at least 1 Draven, ideally a level 2 Draven, and then I push to level 8 as fast as possible. You generally do want to stay... You're using excess gold to push to level 8, generally. You do want to stay above 50 income. But obviously, if you get low health and within lethal range, you're pretty much going to all in at that point, and just Hail Mary and try and get top 4. And then at level 8, you'll just spend rerolls looking for Yasuo, looking for Swain. You pretty much are selling units that aren't a part of this endgame comp. Again, if you don't get the Darkened item here, and you, for example, only get Rapid Fire Cannon instead of the Blade Master item, instead of Gnar, you can always hold on to Elise, and that way you will still get the 4 demons without the demon item here. So, if you have BF swords, those are probably going to be best used on either Swain or Draven. You can either make like a Guardian Angel, or you can just make Infinity Edge, or something like that. Needlessly large rods are pretty much either going to be best used on Morgana or on Swain. You could technically use them on Aatrox as well. If you make Aatrox a sorcerer, for example, because you've just gone the whole game and you still have Elise here, and you've like never found a Swain, and you get enough to make a sorcerer item, I would put it on Aatrox, just so he can use his. You get the 3 sorcerer bonus, and he can use his slams even faster, because these do like a ridiculous ton of damage. Oh wait, you wouldn't have Elise here. I forgot I already had Elise in here. At this point, you would probably just have Varus. You could also just have any other demon, really. So you could have Evelyn. You can have... trying to remember what the other demon is. Brand. I think there's one more that I'm forgetting. Can't find Brand here. But yeah, you can basically have whatever other unit in here just to get the 4 demon. And you would obviously still want to have the shapeshifter, so you would also have Nidalee in here before you found... and so Nidalee is the one you drop out first. Of Nidalee and Elise, if you have 2 of them, you would drop out Nidalee first, and then put in whichever other shapeshifter you found, pretty much. And then obviously, like, Blade Master isn't important, so you would have, for example, Nidalee Varus would be like a standard level 6, level 7-ish comp before you could find stuff. And then you wouldn't have the sorcerer item on Aatrox, you know. So that's pretty much the basis of that comp. That's the Blade Master variation of that comp. I already went over that you can transfer out Elise and Gnar, and Elise for Swain, and Nidalee and Gnar, and that type of stuff, and Gangplank for Yasuo. So that's pretty much the standard there. So if you wanted to transfer this comp to a slightly different version, is that we would have Elise here. We would still ideally look for Swain, and this is an assassin variation on this comp. You would still pretty much want these 2 main items on Nidalee here. You would want Morello's on Morgana, and then here we're going to get Akali. We're going to get Elise, or not Elise, Evelyn, and Katarina. And so here, you can also put secondary tier items onto Katarina and have her, or not Katarina, Akali, and have her as a secondary carry, or Katarina, depending on which you find first and which you have the items for, and things like this. And this way you'll keep the 2 Imperial bonus, you keep 3 Assassins. Wow, I'm gonna get their names mixed up. I don't know why Akali and Katarina are tripping me up here. You can put mana items on either one of them in addition to Swain and get a lot of good value that way. And then pretty much again here you would want either like Phantom Dancer or Dragon's Claw on either one of them, and you have a secondary carry there. And then Evelyn is just a good execute, another spell damage based unit here. So I think this comp is significantly weaker than the Blade Master variation, but it is technically an option. Part of why it is so much weaker is that Akali especially is going to be hotly contested by many other people, and so it's going to be hard to get her level 2. But this is another solid option that you can run. And then you can also sort of transfer this into running your comp in some variation of this formation. And you can change the positioning here of where exactly you want things. And you can put like Lockets and Zeeks here. If you are doing this, you'll want the Locket and Zeeks unit to be in this middle hex where Akali is currently. And that way you get the 5 bonus on these 5 units in the center of the board. You don't want the Zeeks or Locket bonus to go onto the corner units, because again, these are basically fodder to get blitz hooked or jumped on by other assassins. These are the units that are going to die first, and so you don't want to give them buffs. You want to have the units that are your main carries here being the ones that are getting buffed. You could obviously transfer in some of these units and shift them around. You know, if you had Lockets, you would probably put them on Morgana. And again, having a burn item is still very important. But you would mostly be looking for Morellos here on Morgana. You wouldn't really be looking for the red buff here. So that is one also option you have. Here, you basically have 5 demons with the... Oh, I'm sorry, you wouldn't have Aatrox in this comp. Let me remove him real quick. I'm sorry, I had an extra unit in here this whole time. You would have 4 demons. If you had the Darken item on Shyvana, you would technically have 5. And you would have still 2 sorcerers. So here you can either build the Darken item or the sorcerer item again. And that way you can either get 3 sorcerers, which helps buff your Akali a bit more. So you are a bit more, you're less physical damage based and more spell damage based. Even though you do have assassins. The assassins, Evelyn and Katarina and Akali are all 3 very heavy spell damage. So I think getting the sorcerer bonus is more important here. So in the event that you, for example, find an extra needlessly large rod and you can't find a tier for the spatula for whatever reason, is that you could put Yuumi on Swain here. You could also technically put it on Akali if you wanted to, or Katarina really, but probably on Swain is still the best option. And then, you know, this would be your comp or something. So that would be the assassin variation. Let me reposition some of this stuff here. The other option, aside from the assassin variation here, is elementalist. So we can go with Brand. We can go with Kennen. Where is Kennen? Kennen. And Anivia. Instead of Kennen, you can also go with Lysandra. That is entirely kind of your preference, whether you think the Glacial CC is equivalent to the Kennen CC. I personally prefer Kennen because if I can't find Morgana, for example, it's another option I can have to put Morellos on him. Although Morellos on Aurelion Sol, Brand, or Anivia in a pinch isn't that bad either, or on Swain. All 3 are pretty viable options here. And then obviously you can still swap Elise out for Nar, for example, if you get the Darken item on Shyvana, and then you can keep the 4 demons. And here you pretty much just, in addition to having the 4 demon 3 shapeshifter 2 dragon, you also have elementalist, and then you can also get, well, you can get sorcerers always with a Yuumi pretty much, because Morgana, Aurelion Sol are just pretty much core in almost every one of these comps, and that's 2 out of 3 sorcerers there already for you. The elementalists already are going to get the mana bonus. They have their separate mana bonus from sorcerers, and it's the same, and it doesn't stack. So if you had the sorcerers, you would absolutely put it on Swain here, because Kennen or Lysandra or Brand or Anivia are not really required. And obviously, before you can find Anivia, you can always put in Lysandra here instead. And then, obviously Elise for Nara, as I already showed earlier as a swap also. Um, this you can also get an extra demon item and put it on probably Kennen or Anivia maybe, and that way you can potentially go up to 6 demons if you, for example, get 2 of the demon items, because this baseline with just the 1 demon item is going to have 5 when you have Elise in here. And you do generally, like, Elise versus Gnar here is kind of preference. Generally, you're going to go with Elise more often because you're going to have to be spending more of your gold to find Brand, for example. He's a higher cost unit and things like that, and so you're going to be less likely to find the Gnars as easily. And like you're going to want to use Brand to get the demon buff sooner in the game, and so you're going to want to hold on to Elise to get the 4 demon buff, because I don't know, it just seems like harder for me to consistently get the demon item here when going the Elementalist comp. So, as a third option for a splashed synergy in this is we can go with Varus, we can go with Karthus, and Kindred. And our positioning here has to be a little bit strange. So here we shift around the positioning for things a tiny bit. And then here again, these are pretty much the required items. Here you have 3 Sorcerer, you have 2 Phantom, you do still get 4 Demon, you get 3 Shapeshifter, you get 2 Ranger. So the reason why Rangers, we have obviously Varus for Demon, and then Kindred. Kindred for the Phantom, obviously for Karthus. You could also go with Ashe as a like early game substitution option, and then you can just, instead of Karthus, go with you can always put in Mordekaiser here early game if you do find the Kindred and hold on to Mord, or you can just get a glacial unit like Sejuani or Volibear. Volibear is a good carry to have in some of these other options because he basically shares all of the exact same items with Shyvana, and then once you find Shyvana and Aurelion Sol, you just sell the Volibear, put the items on Shyvana. So this comp, you want the Kindred in the center of the hex so that as many units are hit by her ult as possible. You definitely want Karthus to be more protected than Varus. Varus and Ranger bonus synergize very well because it applies the Demon debuff more often, similarly with Glacial on Ashe. And then, again, like, similar comp idea pretty much is, like, this is just a solid Ranger Phantom Sorcerer, like, splashing instead of the Blade Master Imperial splashing that you had in the original comp, which I think is the most powerful. So, these other comps, the Elementalist, the Assassins, and this Phantom Ranger, I think these are all a fair size bit weaker compared to the first comp. There's basically 2 main comps that I go, that I try and force. And so the other main comp here that we try and force, aside from the Blade Master Imperial, is a Yordle variant. So here you definitely do want Gnar, and you still want these 5 units. These 5 units are very core. And then in addition, we get Kennen, we get Lulu. Where is Lulu? I'm stupid and I can't find Lulu. There she is. And then we also can get generally any other demon. I normally go with Aatrox here. Because I think he's better than Varus at using the Sorcerer bonus. He's just more consistent at hitting multiple units with his ult and things like that. And then so here, pretty much you have 3 Sorcerer, 3 Shapeshifter, 3 Yordle, and then you still have the Dragon and the 4 Demon with the Darken item again. And so this is, again, very good. Lulu especially scales very well with having the Shyvana raid boss, because if Lulu is ulting the Shyvana, she's just like even more extra unkillable. And then obviously the Sorcerer bonus scales very well with your like Aatrox and your Swain and just your demons in general. It helps Gnar ult even, and just obviously Morgana and Kennen ult and things like that. You have good CC because of Gnar, Morgana, and Kennen. You have good damage. Obviously, the Sorcerer bonus gives you good damage. Aatrox, again, does lots of damage. And then the Yordle bonus scales extremely well with Shapeshifter extra health points because you're basically multiplying the 25% dodge over a larger even health bar. And, of course, same with Lulu, even making those health bars even bigger. So this is probably what I would consider about equal. This is arguably stronger and easier to get than the Blademaster variation with Imperials, simply because it relies less on Swain and Yasuo, and so the average cost of these units is much smaller, and it's more able to consistently hit these units. I do think if you can find Swain and Yasuo, the other comp is stronger, but it's kind of just like a high risk, high reward type thing. So I think this is probably, if not, if it's like the second best comp, it's probably more consistent. So it's kind of a personal preference, I think, on which one you try to force more often than the other. Whether you're trying to high roll for first, maybe it's kind of a judgment call based on what you're offered, based on your health total in the game, based on how your econ is doing, how aggressive that lobby is, things like that. But I do think obviously you can substitute in Elise here instead of Swain. And then yeah, this is what I would consider probably the second strongest comp out of making a Shyvana raid boss here. And then the final comp, which again I would consider a little bit weaker, is we get rid of Elise here. We actually put in Nidalee. And then here I would actually switch some things around. We drop out Aatrox, and we add in Ahri, and we drop Kennen. No, we keep Kennen. What do I have extra here? I need Warwick. What unit do I have extra here? You have Shyvana, Gnar, Aurelion Sol, Nidalee, Ahri, Lulu, Kennen, Warwick. Oh, Morgana. Okay. So yeah, then this is pretty much how I would set this comp up. Your Ahri and Nidalee can pretty much be interchangeably here. And then, so this is the last composition with a Shyvana raid boss. This is very similar to the old wild shapeshifter sorcerer comp that was centered around Aurelion Sol when TFT was in beta and first came out. And here you pretty much are less reliant on getting the demon buff on Shyvana. Your most required item is still Phantom Dancer, of course, and then obviously Morello's on, in this case, Kennen is probably the best unit for it. You can also swap Kennen and Nidalee around something like this, or Kennen and Warwick. There's like a little bit of options here on how your front line looks. And basically, again, you still get the 3 Yordle here, which multiplies the Shapeshifter health bonus, but here you're also getting 4 Wild, which multiplies the attack speed. Lulu scales very well with attack speed. Shyvana as a carry scales very well with attack speed, and so you're kind of getting a hybrid of the two. I do think the Wild scaling is still quite a bit weaker after the scaling changes going off the baseline attack speed than they used to. Here you can sort in. This is an 8 unit composition here, and there's not really much that you can splash in with spatula items. So here for spatulas, I would look into using Force of Nature primarily, and then you can either add in like another brawler. So probably Cho'Gath is probably the best option here, just to have more frontline and have another unit that could use Morello's. And then other than that, you're pretty much still looking to primarily put attack speed and carry items on Shyvana. This is probably the most Shyvana variant items that you could have on her. So you could have Thornmail, you could have Warmogs. Titanic Hydra is pretty decent on her. It's also good on Gnar. Again, Rapid Fire Cannon is always going to be solid. Let's see. I'm trying to think of others. The Darkened item, the Blademaster item are also just solid. You could put Shrink Ray on her. I wouldn't really put Hurricane on her, probably. And then, of course, you have a whole bunch of other options on the other teammates here. So, let me just open up this other file here of notes I have on items for stuff. So basically, your item priorities when going these comps are pretty much, for Spatula, your priority is going to be Demon, then the Sorcerer item, then kind of a tie between Force of Nature and the Blademaster item, and then your bow priority is going to be Phantom Dancer, then Rapid Fire Cannon, then probably a second Phantom Dancer on any other unit, if you can, or Titanic Hydra on... Yasuo is also a pretty good user of Titanic Hydra, but Gnar is also pretty solid there. or the Blade Master item, as already mentioned. Chain Vest, your priority is definitely going for Phantom Dancer first, then Red Buff, then either a second Phantom Dancer, or just like Disarm, Thornmail, Frozen Heart, that type of items. Those are kind of very secondary. If you can get another Phantom Dancer, that is definitely your priority with Chain Vests. For belts, your priority number one is going to be Morello's / Red Buff, and then obviously a second one, if you can even get that, would also be good. Generally, having one Morello's is very good. Two Red Buffs doesn't really work that well. Morello's is the better burn item, so if you can make Morello's versus Red Buff, you would generally prefer to make Morello's. Otherwise, you can put Warmogs on Shyvana is also pretty solid, or on Gnar, always solid. You can put these on Swain as well. So that's your priority with belts. For BF Sword, making Infinity Edge or Guardian Angel is good. You can technically go with Zeke's or like a Spear of Sojin on like Aurelion Soul or Aatrox or something. And then Bloodthirster on Draven also works. Pretty much just never make Sword of the Divine. Pretty much most of the other BF Sword items are pretty solid. For needlessly large rods, your number one priority is Morello's. If you have the Imperial synergy, Ionic Spark is very good, especially on Swain. That I would highly recommend that, because the Imperial buff will double the damage of Ionic Spark, so that way it's dealing 400 damage. Other than that, Deathcap is good, Gunblade is good. You can put Gunblade on Shyvana as well in these comps. Shyvana is basically the most, I would say, item adaptable unit in the game, and that's pretty much because she can use 2 damage items. She gets a lot of value off of both defensive and offensive items. And just her unit as a unit standalone with just the Dragon bonus and Phantom Dancer can pretty much scale and use almost anything. So yeah, Needlessly Large Rod. Luden's is okay. Deathcap is okay. Whatever else you want to use. Locket is just okay. You would generally have preferred other uses for your Chain Vests, because you'll want a Red Buff and a Phantom Dancer, if not other second Phantom Dancers. So it's pretty unlikely that you'll use Needlessly Large Rods, also because you're using the first one on Morello's and probably the second one on Ionic Sparks. Negatron, I already mentioned, the first two are definitely going to Dragon Claw. From there on, Ionic Spark is good, Cursed Blade is good. Other than that, Zephyr and Disarm are both also pretty solid. I would say they're probably a tier above going Bloodthirster and Hush. Pretty much as long as you're not going Hurricane, you're fine. Hurricane doesn't really get that much use. You could technically, in a pinch, put it on a demon. Probably Shyvana would actually be the best unit to use Hurricane, if she had demon and no rapid fire cannon or something. But even then, not a huge benefit here. So Hurricane is probably the weakest Negatron item by far. And then tier, your first priority is going to be the Demon Spatula item, the Darken item. After that, Frozen Heart is good, Redemption is good, Seraph's is good. All of those are probably a tier above, going like Hush, Shiv, Sojin, and Luden's, and things like that. So that's generally the priority with items. Pretty much items that you never build. You're never going to build the Glacial Hammer. You're never going to build the Night item. You're probably never going to build Sword of the Divine. Thornmail is pretty niche. Redemption is sort of niche. But all the rest of the items are pretty much buildable. Assassin is also pretty unlikely for you to build unless you're going the Assassin comp, but even then you already have 3 Assassins. So those are kind of the Raid Boss Shyvana composition guide here. Going over the positioning, going over everything else, lots of the different adaptability. Again, I think this is the best comp because there's pretty much 6 main variations that you can go into, and even within those variations, there's 2 or 3 unit swaps within those variations of each of those that you can do over the course of the game, or just based on how lucky you are. There's tons of, you can use pretty much every base item in the game, and you're not using that many, so it's not like the old like Luden's and Deathcap stacking or Locket stacking, where you need like 3 needlessly large rods and 3 chain vests, or like 5 needlessly large rods or whatever else. Here you pretty much need a bow, a chain vest, 1 belt, and then either another needlessly large rod or a second chain vest, and then 1 spatula and 1 tier. And that's pretty much your item core that you can win most every game just based on that. Negatron cloaks are good. They're probably the least important item, but getting 2 at least is very good, so that you can just slap those on Swain and then have another like nearly invincible carry. Other bows are also good, so you generally, like 3 bows would technically be ideal, so that you could make Phantom Dancer and Rapid Fire Cannon, but 2 bows is plenty, because you can just put or rather 2 bows and 2 spatulas is also very good, because then you can just put Blade Master on Shyvana. Belts are good because you're going to want to make ideally at least Morello's and or Red Buff. ideally and, so having 2 belts is fine. Again, having 2 chain vests is fine, having 2 bows is fine, having 2 spatulas is fine, having 2 tears is fine, because then you can just put like Frozen Heart or Redemption or Seraphs or whatever else on your Swain and just make him transform a little bit earlier, so having a second tier is obviously fine. So yeah, BF swords are probably the least useful item. GA is pretty good, but again, if you're going the Draven comp, just slap 2 BF swords, just give him an Infinity Edge, and then he's plenty fine on his own, and that's just a plenty fine use for the BF sword items. So yeah, that is my composition guide for the Shyvana raid boss comps. Let me know if there's anything else you guys would like me to go over here pretty much. Again, you do generally want to push for level 7 and then roll. You do use XP. I generally try to spend only 16 gold on XP at a time. So like for example, I forget if it's going from 5 to 6 or 6 to 7 there or whatever, but I get 14 generally out of 30 before using the 16 gold to level up there and things like that. And then once you find the base like core of your comp, pretty much, again, hold on to Gangplank instead of Yasuo is a good Yasuo replacement to get 3 Blade Masters and stuff. Shen is also a good kind of secondary replacement if you're not able to find Gangplanks and Yasuos for whatever reason. Volibear and Warwick can be good just early game. You can slap your items on Volibear. And then do try and push for level 8. Most of these comps do kind of fully come online at level 8. You can technically do most of them pretty solidly. Starting from level 6 is kind of like the minimum, but level 7 is like generally the more like stabilization point. And then you push to level 8. I have very, very, very rarely pushed to level 9. And usually in that case, for example, on the very first comp, you do still have 2 sorcerers in Morgana and Aurelian Soul in that, so you can just put in a 3rd sorcerer at that point, or you can just put in, if you, for example, didn't find another demon the whole time, you can put in an extra demon or an extra blade master at that point, or if you have Gnar, you can always put in a 2nd wild for Gnar, and then you could find Ari or Warwick or something at that point and put in that for wild on Gnar. So all these comps are very adaptable. They scale very well. They do like you want to pick up the early game units that you have access to that do fit in the end game comps. So pretty much early game, I'm picking up every Nidalee and every Elise that I see. Warwick is also a good 3rd unit, but those are the main 2 that I'm looking out for in terms of 1-cost units. In terms of 2-cost units, pick up generally every Varus, and then from there it's depending on what else you've seen. Generally picking up Ari isn't super bad, depending on if you already have the other wild synergy. Picking up Lulu is also pretty solid. Picking up Lysandra can be okay. Most of the other ones you generally are fine to pass over. You can pick up Blitzcrank for if you have Warwick or Volibear or something, just to have the Brawler synergy potential. 3-cost units, pick up every Aatrox you see, every Shyvana you see, obviously, every Morgana. Generally, Volibear is also pretty good. Kennen is also pretty good. Gangplank is also pretty solid. Picking up Ashe, Evelynn, and Katarina are very variable. If you've already found like Akali or something, and you know you're going to go into Assassins, you can go with Katarina and Evelynn. But again, I think that comp is generally weaker than the Blade Master or the Yordle Sork variant. So generally, I don't go Assassins, and I haven't had very much success with it. At level 4, you're generally only picking up the first 3 of the 4-cost units that you see. You're generally never looking to make tier 3 units out of the 4-cost units. So pick up every Draven, every Gnar, and every Aurelian Soul, but once you find 3 of them, generally I pass on them. Going for Kindred Akali or Cho'Gath or Brand are also pretty variable. You're pretty much never going for Leona or Sejuani. Just kind of depends on what you're looking for there. I do always, throughout the game, pick up every Shyvana, Morgana, and Aatrox. Those are kind of the core 3 that work in the Blade Master comp that I'm going for almost every game. And those I will try and get 3 costs, or tier 3 stars of, sorry, for Aatrox, Morgana, and Shyvana of those 3-cost units. You generally don't go for 3 stars on Nidalee or Release because in your idealized endgame comp, you would not use them. You can technically, I do sometimes go for 3-star Elise, simply because getting the Darken item until late game can be pretty hard sometimes, and that way you'll have Elise in for Gnar more often than probably the other way around for most of the game. So going for 3-star Elise can be solid. And then obviously go for level 2 Swain and level 2 Yasuo if you can, otherwise they're not that required. Going for level 2 Anivia and Karthus. Karthus is probably better than Anivia to go for level 2 for, but that's kind of a judgment call. I generally wouldn't go for Anivia unless like I already had found 2 of them or something. On carousel rounds, you're looking for the item. Number 1 priority is the item. Pretty much bow and spatula are your highest 2, then probably chain vest and belt, and then after that, Negatron and BF sword are pretty down there. Tier is probably like the 3rd tier there of items. Am I missing one? Tier, Negatron. Trying to think for a second. Tier, Negatron. I went over bow and spatula. Tier Negatron. Oh, needlessly large rod is also equivalent about to a tier. But chain vest and belt are better than Negatron and tier. So there's like tier 1 is like bow and spatula. Tier 2 is chain vest and belt. Tier 3 is Negatron, or not Negatron, is needlessly large rod and tier. And then tier 4 is Negatron and BF sword. And even then, you would probably prioritize Negatrons over BF sword. So on carousel, almost never pick a BF sword. If there's multiple units of the same like tier of item, go for the higher cost unit so that you get more gold out of it. If there is generally 2 equivalent items and you'll use both of them, like for example, it's between like a tier and you already have the Darken item, or a needlessly large rod and you already have a Morello's, and you're not really like super wanting either of them. You're just like they're both kind of meh, and they're just okay, and they both have the same cost unit. Is that I'll generally pick whichever one has fewer. So if there's like 2 needlessly large rods and only 1 tier, I'll generally take the tier. That way, if somebody else needed the tier, they can't get the tier anymore. Whereas if I took the needlessly large rod, there's still somebody else can get the needlessly large rod, and I haven't denied anything from them. So that's kind of a judgment call. You can also do that if you're technically scouting your opponents like super well or whatever, but I don't think anybody is quite to that level just yet of like knowing they'll need the needlessly large rod. And then you can also then hope like somebody that picks after you also wanted needlessly large rod to take both of them away. I don't know, it seems less consistent, but that's generally the way I think about it from there. And that is pretty much it. I kind of spent another several minutes here at the end kind of concluding things and going over everything again, but hopefully that was a lot of info for you guys. I've been having good success with this comp. I think this is probably the strongest overall comp in the game and the most versatile. Again, mainly the Yordle Sork variation and the Imperial Blademaster variation. Those 2, I think, are pretty much going to be extremely powerful, and they are good into almost every other meta comp. Basically because Shyvana and the Dragon bonus is kind of broken. And yeah, making them immune to magic damage is pretty strong, and being able to put so many variations of damage items on her makes her probably the single best carry unit in the game. So yeah, that's it. Thanks for watching.